Good evening, everyone. We're going to continue with the video format tonight. I think again, it's been a good format to express some of the ideas here, especially tonight. We're going to talk about the subject of mysticism, and I think it just seems like it would not be the best topic to write about, given the subject matter. And I also think that, again, as my thoughts on this develop, I think it's just a much easier way to communicate ideas and have people engage in the ideas through sort of a video presentation. So we'll continue with that. If anyone strongly prefers text, which I doubt, but if anyone does, let me know. And of course, from time to time, we'll still use the text format as needed. Sometimes it's just easier, but I think we're going to continue with video for a while. I think last night we wrote on Pascal, and a very interesting passage in his Penses, which was really the only passage we talked about from that work, but it was the argument that if someone, when you're in an argument with someone, you have to admit that whatever side of the issue or whatever side of the perception that they're looking at something, their perception is true because the senses are not false. So Pascal took that argument, and we discussed sort of the implications of it. And in another passage in the same work, Pascal said that the wise person knows that he cannot entirely found his life on reason, and he cannot, but yet he cannot exclude reason. So reason has to be a part of our lives, but it can't be all of it. And so that those sort of two observations, sort of, in my mind, naturally led to the topic we're going to talk about tonight, mysticism. Because in some sense, what the mystic sees, and I think we'll see that as we get into the book we're going to discuss tonight, they are seeing the mystic, or when someone has sort of a mystical experience, they are seeing something in their experience which is true. And it doesn't mean, again, as we mentioned last night, doesn't mean they can necessarily explain it to anyone else. Doesn't mean they can, that state will last for a very long time. It doesn't mean that that they have the right to impose that view on others, or seek to convince others that their mystical experience was true. But at least for them, it was true. And on the other hand, it is, of course, mysticism is not thought of as part of a rational life. It's sort of beyond reason, but it can have a profound effect on someone's life, and for the good and for the bad. And we'll see that tonight too. So we're going to continue discussing William James's varieties of religious experience, and these were actually a series of lectures James gave, and we're going to not focus on the religious aspect so much, but some of the more interesting sort of ethical or aspects of the work. And in two of the last chapters, Mysticism, James sort of describes what it is to have a mystical experience, and as he does in many of the other chapters, goes through it with a lot of examples that he picks from all over the place. I think a lot of them were letters he had received from people. I guess by the time he's pretty famous, so he was receiving a lot of letters from people all over the country, and he's also was obviously a scholar, so he had a ample library to select from. So I'm going to focus on some of the things that he says, both conceptually and also some of the examples he talks about. First, to start out with, he says, what does it mean to have a mystical experience? That's a great way to start out, I think, because mysticism means so many things to so many different people. And he says basically that there's four attributes that he can think of, and I think he gets it fairly right here. He says one of them is ineffability. The mystical experience is not something that can easily be reported in words, he says. It follows, he says, from this that its quality must be directly experienced, cannot be imparted or transferred to others. no one can make clear to another who has never had the same feeling. So you can try to explain it. You can try very hard to explain it, but there's just something about it that's just ineffable and not transferable to others. You alone are the person that can have that sort of mystical experience. Any attempt to impart that experience to others or describe it to others is going to fall short. It's not, you're not going to be able to translate that to someone else. It has to be something that remains for yourself. The second quality, he says, is there's sort of a mystical states are states of knowledge that they can impart. He says that they are illuminations, revelations, full of significance and importance, all inarticulate though they remain. So, on the one hand, they're ineffable to others, but yet they are, in some sense, impart a lot of meaning and knowledge to the person through either illuminations or revelations, seeing things differently, having different perspectives on things. That, in James' view at least, does amount to a form of knowledge. He says another aspect is transiency. They come and go. These mystical states aren't something that most people can sort of, maintain for any long period of time. They're something that come and go, usually in about half an hour, he says, or at most an hour or two. Beyond that, the experience is sort of lost, although it can continue to have an effect, as he talks about in some of his examples, which are very interesting. And he also says they're passive, that they can't. The mystic feels as if his own will were in abeyance, and indeed sometimes as if he were grasped and held by a superior power. So, in this sense, a mystical experience is not something that you can sort of will to happen. It's not something that you have power over. It sort of just happens to you. You have some view or vision of something, or some sound, or some experience, something that some experience out there that suddenly brings a sort of mystical vision to you, mystical experience, and so those four qualities: ineffability, hard to describe in words or impart to others; some sort of knowledge imparted, very brief, and also not really an experience we can control, or he thinks sort of the dominant sort of characteristics of this kind of experience. And I think he's got most of them pretty correct there. I mean, I think he's described what it is for an experience to be mystical. And in fact, if you sort of take the opposite of each one of those terms, you see that it does seem like those experiences would be very, very far from mystical, basically ordinary experiences. Ordinary experiences are ones that we can impart to others through words. They aren't transient because they're ordinary. They're typical, the day-to-day experiences we have, and they certainly aren't passive because we're the ones that are acting in the world. We can, if we want to go to, for example, to the supermarket and buy a Red Bull, that's an ordinary experience that happens every day. We can describe it to others. Passive, it's not passive; it's active. We go about doing it. So I think he's hit on most of the key characteristics. He says he's not so interested. Interestingly, he acknowledges that there's sort of this prejudice against mystical experiences, that they can sort of lead to some sort of insanity and stuff, and some derangement, delusions. He says, of course, I think he says, that any phenomenon, he says, is best understood, studied in its germ and in its overripe decay, and compared with its exaggerated and degenerated kind. He says, of course it can lead to some of these bad tendencies and insanity and things that we would be really worried about, but it doesn't have to. And the examples he focuses on are positive, in terms of people having a mystical experience and it affecting them in a positive way in their life. And we'll turn to that pretty much now. I'm going to just focus on some of the some of the better letters he received or experiences he got of mystical experiences. One of them he gets from a man by the name of Charles Kingsley, who says in his youth, "When I walk the fields, I am oppressed now and then with an innate feeling that everything I see has a meaning, if I could but understand it. And this feeling of being surrounded with truths which I cannot grasp amounts to indescribable awe sometimes." And that's, again, Charles Kingsley. He goes on to say that basically alcohol can have sort of this mystical effect on people. He says, and this is James himself writing, "The sway of alcohol over mankind is unquestionably due to its power to stimulate the mystical faculties of human nature, usually crushed to earth by the cold facts and dry criticisms of the sober hour." What a wonderful formula there. Let me read that again. "The sway of alcohol over mankind is unquestionably due to its power to stimulate the mystical faculties of human nature, usually crushed to earth by the cold facts and dry criticisms of the sober hour. Sobriety diminishes, discriminates, and says no. Drunkenness expands, unites, and says yes. It is in fact the great exciter of the yes function in man." He's still speaking of drinking here. "It brings its votary from the chill periphery of things to the radiant core. It makes him for the moment one with truth. Not through mere perversity do men run after it." That's an interesting, again, formulation there. "Not through mere perversity do men run after it. To the poor and the unlettered, it stands in the place of symphony concerts and of literature, and is part of the deeper mystery and tragedy of life, that whiffs and gleams of something that we immediately recognize as excellent should be vouchsafed to so many of us only, in the fleeting earlier phases of what in its totality is so degrading a poisoning. The drunken consciousness is one bit of the mystic consciousness, and our total opinion of it must find its place in our opinion of that larger whole." I mean, who hasn't at some point felt sort of that same experience when drinking? I mean, who hasn't felt that simulation of some sort of mystical faculty or some sort of, truth that they're sort of experiencing that they wouldn't have otherwise experienced when they were sober? Who hasn't felt that it's, again, moderate drinking, not the kind that would cause you to get in trouble or, harm yourself. But the moderate drinking hasn't, put you in a mood where you're affirming life rather than negating things, more cheerful and more open to different kinds of experiences. So again, and he says again, "Not through mere perversity do men run after it, but that in some sense they run after it because they are interested, and they're interested in simulating this sort of mystical faculty in them that is otherwise dormant," he says, "by the cold and dry criticisms of the sober hour." James goes on to, again, he's getting all of these letters. He's focusing on the ones that sort of depict this mystical experience in as startling a manner as he can. He talks about how for some people the mystical experience causes them to finally experience and know things that they had always been told. Basically, if you're told that, all suffering is for a reason. I mean, you can always be told that. You can always know those words. But once you have a mystical experience, James says, you will really know that. You will know what that means to its core. This won't be words for you. Quotes, I think this is, who is this here? This is, let me see here. Well, I think this is a Mr. Trin, and he quotes Mr. Trin here as saying, "In that moment when he has his mystical experience, the whole of my life passed before me, including each little meaningless piece of distress, and I understood them. This was what it had all meant. This was the piece of work it had all been contributing to." A couple pages later, this is from Emil's journal in time. "Shall I ever again have any of those prodigious reveries which sometimes came to me in former days? One day in youth at sunrise, sitting in the ruins of the castle of Fakinji, and again in the mountains under the noonday sun above Lavi, lying at the foot of a tree and visited by 3 butterflies. Once more at night upon the shingly shore of the northern ocean, my back upon the sand and my vision ranging through the Milky Way. Such grand and spacious, immortal, cosmogonic reveries when one reaches to the stars, when one owns the infinite. Moments divine, ecstatic hours, in which our thought flies from world to world, pierces the great enigma, breathes with a respiration broad, tranquil, and deep as the respiration of the ocean, serene and limitless as the blue firmament. Instance of irresistible intuition in which one feels oneself great as the universe and calm as a god. Again, another mystical experience here from the German idealist Melvita von Messenberg. I was alone upon the seashore as all these thoughts flowed over me, liberating and reconciling. And now again, as once before in distant days in the Alps of Dauphin, I was impelled to kneel down, this time before the illimitable ocean, symbol of the infinite. I felt that I prayed as I had never prayed before, and know now what prayer really is, to return from the solitude of individuation into the consciousness of unity with all that is, to kneel down as one that passes away, and to rise up as one imperishable. Earth, heaven, and sea resounded as in one vast world encircling harmony. It was as if the chorus of all the great who had ever lived were about me. I felt myself one with them, and it appears as if I had heard their greeting. Thou too belongest to the company of those who overcome. Again, he cites Walt Whitman. I think he cited Walt Whitman previously here. And Walt is saying, there is, apart from mere intellect, in the makeup of every superior human identity, a wondrous something that realizes without argument, frequently without what is called education, though I think it is the goal and apex of all education deserving the name, an intuition of the absolute balance in time and space, of the whole of this multifariousness, this revel of fools, an incredible make-believe and general unsettledness, what we call the world, a soul sight of that divine clue, an unseen thread, which holds the whole congeries of things, all history and time, and all events, however trivial, however momentous, like a leash dog in the hand of the hunter. So again, the sense that truths are being communicated that one would not have had experience of before, this sense that one is sort of feels a sort of unity with all, basically all existence. This sense that these moments are ecstatic. They're bringing at the same time. It's interesting. They're bringing both sort of an ecstatic high, but at the same time sort of a calming of the soul. Sort of both at the same time, which seems like a contrast in some sense, but at least in the mystical experiences of these persons that we have read, they seem to be existing at the same time. And let me just read one more here. This is from a writer by the name of J. Trevor. He says he hasn't told anyone about his mystical experiences. To no soul have I named them, lest I should be building my life and work on mere fantasies of the brain. But I find that after every questioning and test, they stand out today as the most real experiences of my life, and experiences which have explained and justified and unified all past experiences and all past growth. Indeed, their reality and their far-reaching significance are ever becoming more clear and evident. When they came, I was living the fullest, strongest, sanest, deepest life. I was not seeking them. What I was seeking with resolute determination was to live more intensely my own life, as against what I knew would be the adverse judgment of the world. So again, the sense that the mystical experience just grips one and doesn't sort of let go. And obviously can have profound, long-standing effect on everything we do in sort of everything we see. So, obviously, to place some of this discussion in context, and I think James had done this previously, he's very aware that these I think were lectures given to a series of professors, or at least some very well-known and very intellectual crowd here, and he knew that what he was saying would probably be regarded somewhat skeptically, and he's prepared to discuss that. People that have not had those experiences, or doubt them, or view them as, again, either some sort of foolish imagining, or something even worse, sort of the ravings of an insane mind, sort of takes that seriously, that thought. And he says here, discusses it, and he says obviously that some, to the medical mind, he says, these ecstasies signify nothing but hypnoid states. To the intellectual mind, these reflect superstition, and to others, a state of degeneration and hysteria. And then he says, undoubtedly these pathological conditions have existed in many, and possibly in all the cases. But that fact tells us nothing about the value for knowledge of the consciousness which they induce. To pass a spiritual judgment upon these states, we must not content ourselves with superficial medical talk, but inquire into their fruits for life. These fruits appear to have been various. So he's saying here, the way I understand it is, whether or not these mystical experiences can be proven or not, or whether or not we can deem them medically, abnormal, whatever it is, we need to look at what kind of effects they've had on people's lives, how they affected lives. And he says that for some people, they've had a very good experience. He talks about them. Next couple of pages, he says, St. Ignatius was a mystic, but his mysticism made him surely one of the most powerful practical human engines that ever lived. And he talks about how for him, his mystical experiences sort of were the fuel for all the labors he had undergone in his life. They enriched his life marvelously. He talks about, then he goes on, this is James writing, mystical conditions may therefore render the soul more energetic in the lines which their inspiration favors. But this could be reckoned an advantage only in case the inspiration were a true one. If the inspiration were erroneous, the energy would be all the more mistaken and misbegotten. And so, again, the mystical experience, I think we saw this in some of the quote from the Crito that we cited a couple times, that if the optimism and zeal for something is good, then if the object is good, if the goal is good, then optimism, then the zeal and the effort, that's all good. If the goal is bad, then more effort and more zeal and more inspiration, as he's talking about here, then it's a problem. It's not good, because you sort of dig deeper and deeper into something that's not good, because your goal is bad. And so he says, but if it's the mystical experience is for a good goal, then what's happening there is you're being further inspired toward that goal, which can only be a good thing. And I think this sort of discussion ties back to what we had read in Spinoza, actually, that things that preserve our own being and help us to increase our powers toward good ends and living self-preservation and things of that sort are good, even if they're pleasures, or I'm not sure he would agree that these sorts of mystical experiences was what he was talking about, but certainly, things of this nature, as long as they, are not leading to insanity or delusion, these sorts of experiences can have very profound, I think, effects on people, as we've sort of discussed here, and there's no reason to look down on them as sort of being deluded or always evil or pernicious. I mean, I think they can in the right circumstance, certainly motivate people in the right ways and focus them on things they hadn't seen. I think James also goes on toward the end to talk about how difficult it is to prove to someone, prove that these experiences, disprove these experiences. All we can say is basically, as he started with in the beginning of the chapter, that they can't be they can't be communicated to others, but we can't disprove them either. So we have to take these experiences as if they happened. That they, he says here, mystical experiences usually are and have the right to be absolutely authoritative over the individuals to whom they come. Of course, they have no authority over us, or anyone else that doesn't have the mystical experience, but that they also impart to people a different kind of consciousness that moves beyond reason and rationalistic consciousness, but one that's based on mystical consciousness. That he says they open out the possibility of other orders of truth, in which, so far as anything in us vitally responds to them, we may freely continue to have faith. Again, so this is an avenue to different forms of truths, and different truths of different natures. There's no way we can disprove them, and they can have, as he goes on to say that they can have incredible powers over people in terms of giving them different. How does he say it here? Let me find the passage. One second. It says, as a rule, mystical states merely add a supersensuous meaning to the ordinary outward data of consciousness. They are excitements like the emotions of love or ambition, gifts to our spirit, by means of which facts already objectively before us fall into a new expressiveness and make a new connection with our active life. They do not contradict these facts as such, or deny anything that our senses have immediately seized. So it's almost like they're a supplement to already existing experiences. They don't change those experiences or deny them, but add further meaning, enrich the meaning of the experiences we're already having. So, for example, I guess what he's trying to say is, if you had, let's say, a mystical experience toward which caused you to think that, I don't know, a certain place that you lived, or was just it was sort of a blessed place. So you would then think, regard your town or your community differently. That would give you a different perspective on your town, the place you live. You would view things in a more positive fashion. You would view everything as sort of endowed with more beauty. And so you're not denying anything, you're not deluded, but you're certainly imparting more meaning to everything you're seeing in your town, because you have this experience that sort of led you to think that you live in a blessed place. That's just an example. You can think of many others. So I guess to sort of wrap up this post, I'm going to post this under the silent stillness virtue. I was thinking about posting it under passion, but it seems like it's really, because it's not something you really control, the mystical experience, it just happens, and it tends to happen when people, as we read in most of these, were sort of in a still state. I think I'm going to put it in that, but I think on the whole, without going too wild with it, I think these sorts of experiences can certainly be a boon to people in their lives, and give them different perspectives and vistas on things that they're already seeing in a good way, and lead them out of sort of bad vistas and bad viewpoints and sort of stale or ugly viewpoints. And to that extent, while they certainly can't be induced, other than the occasional drink that we talked about earlier, and I don't think those are sort of serious mystical experiences. Unlike those aren't the sort of serious mystical experiences James talks about later. I still think that they are something that have their place in life and have their place in our blog. So we'll talk to you soon. Bye-bye.